What do security cameras monitoring a U.S. Army base, the streets of Memphis, a United States embassy overseas, and a ton of homes and offices in the United States have in common? Well, they are all being monitored by security cameras developed by Hangshu Hikvision Digital Technology. This is a company that is 42% owned by the Chinese government. Now, this has raised some concerns amongst the cybersecurity community, and we'll figure out today whether those concerns are valid and how the cyber community should see the rise of China. For Tech Republic and ZDNet, I'm Dan Patterson, and it's a pleasure to speak today with Newstar Senior Director of Security Research, Brian Knopf. Brian, thanks for joining us today. Before we get started, I do want to preface this by saying this is not at all an attack on China or the Chinese government or the Chinese people, but rather an analysis of the investments the Chinese government have made in this IoT device and this camera, and the implications of China as a rising power in the cybersecurity community. So, Brian, thanks for joining us today. I know that's a lot, but I wonder if we could start by zooming out 30,000 feet and just talk about why the rise of China has some in the cyber community concerned.
Well, first, thank you for having me. The issue with China, and whether it's so much China or just any government having a hand in consumer or business devices, is the issue really is about control of the supply chain. You have these cameras being put in environments, and the question is who controls the software update? Who makes sure that what's on there is appropriate, and what kind of data is being shared back with the manufacturer? Now, in the case of China, if it's being shared with the manufacturer, does that mean the Chinese government is also getting it? And that would be the concern for not just privacy, but when you're dealing with government installations, shipment dates, frequency, who's visiting, what vendors are coming in, because those cameras see everything.
And often in the cyber community, we talk about concerns with Russia and software, and obviously the United States and our allies are hacking as much as we are being hacked. But I'm glad you pointed out it's about the rise of one particular power, and 42% is a significant ownership. What is it about the, I would assume, lack of transparency into the process that is concerning?
Well, cameras are very different than, connected devices are very different than your desktop operating system updates. If you have an update from Apple or from Microsoft, they deliver the update directly to you, right? If it's Adobe, they deliver that update. With these cameras, you have updates from the chipset manufacturers, you have updates from the vendor who makes it, and then you have update from the person who ships it to you. And the problem is that you need all three to collaborate in order to get an update. So if there's a security problem, because these are mostly Linux-based devices, the problem gets to be that getting an update to that device is hard to do because you need all three to come together. Now, when there's no transparency on what's running on that, aside from your camera functions, then the question becomes, well, who's getting information that's on those devices? A lot of times the vulnerabilities will come in the form of utilities that are used to test the product off the assembly line. Normally they're testing that the IP address works, the serial number is programmed properly. But a lot of those tool sets have things like backdoors. And that's where we've seen in the past, backdoors into routers or backdoors into cameras. In this case, now that company is tied to the Chinese government, that becomes a bigger concern.
So that backdoor access is, like you said, it's linked to the supply chain, and Hangshu has 42% of this, or 42% of this company is owned by the Chinese government. So, do we know anything, or can you shed some light on this company? What types of products do they develop? Where could they be distributed around the world? And most importantly, who would be vulnerable to backdoors in this hardware?
Well, I would say I don't know their whole distribution model. What I do know is that they focus a lot on the cameras, and that those cameras are used at aerospace and military installations, businesses of any vertical, and consumers. Sometimes they're labeled under other product names, but those cameras are very widespread. And whether you can buy them online or you can buy them in stores. The problem is that there are so many places where these cameras show up.
So how would a company or how would a backdoor in such a large amount of devices be on the back end? How would that be monitored? What type of software would be used, or what type of data signals would a an entity be looking for?
If you're looking to monitor, I would be looking at where the traffic from that camera is going, right? So it should be traffic going from whoever's looking at that camera, right? Your knock or sock or remote viewing stations directly to those cameras. Now the cameras will have to get updates, so they will be hitting an IP address. Where that IP address is should be looked at. But then looking at what regular callbacks are happening between that and any other servers. A lot of times with these devices, you'll see them making calls to places in China, and then you should be looking at what information is being sent to that. Is it doing it frequently, or is it just looking for an update every once in a while?
Are there analogous companies or organizations that are not in China? And again, every large country is hacking every other large country and using similar tactics. So are there similar companies that we can look at, or organizations that might help us kind of understand this company better?
I think if you look at the manufacturing for electronic devices as a whole, you see a lot of stuff done in Taiwan and China. And so the question becomes whether this is just standard practice for a company just sending information back like many of those companies do, or is this something specific because they're partially owned by the Chinese government? And I wouldn't make a call that it's specifically because it's the Chinese government, but that a lot of these companies operate in the same way. Having worked at consumer electronics companies building IoT devices for many years, we saw that in many different manufacturers' products. Some did it on purpose, and some just had simple callbacks that they used for testing that never got removed.
So what should companies or organizations, government, what should we learn from this? This is an interesting glimpse into the supply chain and into how IoT could be used for surveillance and to undermine cybersecurity protocols. But what are the real lessons to learn from this?
Well, supply chain, it's the important part. So you get a product you're putting in your environment, and the question really becomes what's on the device, provided by what vendors, and what's the update process or protection around that update process. That's the first thing. The second thing is then understanding what kind of controls are in place for that so that you can lock it down. Now, most companies hear about network segmentation, separating out different types of network traffic, but very rarely does it get done the way that security people ask for it to be done. These kind of cameras have no business being on a corporate network in any scenario, whether they were secure or not. They really should be separated out into their own environments so that no one's looking at that traffic, and it's only going to the people who need to see that kind of camera information.
Great advice from Neustar Senior Director of Security Research, Brian Knopf. Brian, I wonder if you could leave us with a forecast looking into 2018 and beyond. What types of cyber threats could companies anticipate in the coming months?
Well, what you're seeing now, I mean, last year we had Mirai, and that was, and really, the big attack on IoT devices. And it was noticeable because it was a tremendous amount of traffic coming across. What you're starting to see now is botnets that are being done very targeted, looking for very specific exploits in devices rather than just mass mailing. And now you're not really seeing them unless you're specifically looking for it because they're very silent. They hit one vulnerability, they take over a device, then they're going for other ones. I think what becomes more important is as you, as a consumer or as a business, are looking at IoT devices, it's very important that you look at the update process, how long they support them, and that they're doing regular updates to patch for these kind of things. From that standpoint, if you know there's a vulnerability that's been disclosed, I would tend to look at companies that have bug bounty programs that are actively working with researchers to make sure that their products are more secure. Even if they have an internal security team, that team can't do it on their own. So having a company that embraces the security research community and wants them to help them improve their products. Now, there are many companies out there you can just, as a consumer, even if you don't know about security, you can go look at those websites for the bug bounty programs and see who actively pays these people. That would make me feel more secure. Now, my house is a giant IoT lab, so I look at these products on a daily basis, and I have about 130 IoT devices in my house. So I look at who updates, what companies are providing, regular updates for security, for content, and that makes me feel more comfortable about, the products I choose.